How far can you get in JToH without using Shiftlock? It's a simple enough question really, but the answer is way more complicated than you might think. At first glance, this restriction doesn't seem too special. All it really seems to do is make towers above challenging difficulty nearly impossible. However, there are many different techniques and optimizations you can make to make this a really interesting challenge. So much so that a YouTuber JerW was able to prove that a terrifying difficulty tower was actually theoretically possible without Shiftlock, which is absolutely insane. He was also able to prove a lot of other towers like Tower of True Skill, Tower of Suffering Outside, and even Citadel of Wacky Strategy. With all this potential for a great challenge, I felt like I had to do something with it. So, I made a new account, joined JToH, and got to work. Before I start, we need to make some ground rules. First, obviously, no Shiftlock or first person for any reason. Second, any non-boost items are allowed. T-pose, heli powers, healing items, or anything else that isn't considered a boost item are considered legit for this challenge if I ever need them. Third, anything goes, as long as the win counts. Any major skips, glitches, or other techniques I might need to use are on the table, as long as I don't skip any checkpoints. Lastly, the series is inspired by ScouthX's No Damage series, so I highly recommend you check them out after this video. However, unlike his run where he went through every tower in an area at once, I will be progressing more traditionally. This means that instead of staying in one area, I'll be jumping between different areas to find the easiest towers available. Anyway, with all the rules out of the way, let's begin with our first tower. First up on the list, we have Tower of Annoyingly Simple Trials. Because this is a tutorial tower, it's no surprise that there aren't any issues that arise if I don't use Shiftlock. We're also introduced to a type of gameplay that we really don't want in this challenge: tight gaps. In this case, it's still wide enough to easily fit through, being 2 studs wide. However, anything tighter and they become a lot harder to get through. If we ever come across a 1-stud gap that isn't next to a wall and isn't skippable, it'll be completely impossible to pass. Other than that, it was an easy walk through the rest of the tower. I was planning to go over the next 3 towers I beat to unlock Ring 2, but then I realized that that's really boring. Since they're all easy difficulty, there wasn't anything interesting to say about them. So instead, I'll save you the trouble of going over them all one by one. Tower of Anger was easier than Toast, because its mega fun obby difficulty gameplay posed absolutely zero problems, besides these horrible 1-stud wraps. How scary. Tower of Jolly Good Fun is just as easy, with the only fail being because of these moving platforms. Tower of Madness was the medium difficulty tower I was required to beat to unlock Ring 2, which is the first tower I completed, which actually had some minor challenges. First of all, there are a total of 7 1-stud wraparounds. Very scary. After that, it was smooth sailing up until this section, where instead of simply wall hopping up like I normally do, I had to walk around the frame. On floor 8, the 1-stud poles were much harder than usual, but still manageable. Since the last 2 floors are completely free, I finished the tower and unlocked Ring 2. With all that out of the way, now that we have Ring 2 unlocked, we have a lot more freedom for what towers we can pick, since unlocking Ring 2 also unlocks Garden of eeshöl. This sub-area has a ton of easy steeples we can beat, but unfortunately they only count for half a point. This is the first and only tower in Ring 2 I'll be doing for now. Even though there weren't any major issues with this one, which is to be expected from a medium tower, this was definitely the hardest I've done so far. First of all, I had to deal with a 3-stud wraparound and a lot of other interesting wraps. Since the difficulty is finally picking up a bit, the gameplay isn't so boring that you fall asleep watching the background footage. Secondly, we're introduced to 2 more types of jumps that aren't very good for this challenge: head hitters and these weird chest jump things. Head hitters are annoying since most of the time you're climbing on the side of the part to get up, especially with harder ones, and this really isn't possible with the uncontrollable turning you get without Shiftlock. The truss jumps aren't as bad, but give a way harder version of this, and the turning makes these really difficult. Lastly, the game mocks me by telling me I can just simply use first person to align for this tightrope. Yeah, right. At least these tightropes aren't that bad. Kinda scared for when we eventually get to TOL though. Now that we have that out of the way, we can go to Garden of eeshöl for a lot of easy steeples to complete. Since we beat ToTS, we only need 4 more tower points and 1 hard difficulty tower, which we'll get to later. This steeple is so pathetically easy that it's rated easier than even Toast. Obviously there was nothing even remotely difficult about this tower, so I speedran it in almost exactly 3 minutes. In the interest of not wanting to talk about easy difficulty towers, I beat Steeple of Devil's Snare and Steeple of Infectious Foliage with 0 problems besides a few stupid fails and awkward jumps. I could keep going with the Garden of eeshöl steeples, but there are still some steeples in Forgotten Ridge that are easier that I can do instead. Like Steeple of Beginner's Journey, this one is easier than Toast. I beat it easily in 3 minutes, but I wanted to try something a little harder. I could just beat it and move on, or I could try the challenge. It took a while to get used to the harder gameplay, but I practiced using no Shiftlock quite a bit before starting this video, so I eventually got consistent. Most of the floor was relatively simple, but there were just a few wraps that were way harder than everything else. Notably this one, which gives you really weird momentum if you jump off it wrong. After over an hour and a half of attempting this single floor, I got to one of the final few jumps only to learn that it was impossible. Amazing. So I reset and rebeat the steeple normally. Maybe I can prove it possible somehow another time, but for now the tower points are all I really need. I was never really a big fan of the steeple. I remembered it being a lot harder than it actually was, and the only part that's made harder without Shiftlock is this little head hitter structure thing. Another thing it helps is that they nerfed the steeple so hard after it was initially released. Originally the lava was actually an insta-kill like it is in Citadel of Peril, and now it's just a regular kill brick. I fell at the start because I was rushing and I kinda just jumped back on the main path without any other punishment besides a few hits of damage. And once you get to the last floor, the lava just stops for a tiny button hunt. Luckily though, it was very straightforward for this challenge, so I was easily able to beat the steeple. For a hard difficulty tower, this is kinda pathetic. It has very basic gameplay which doesn't really pose any real challenge. There are walkarounds on floor 5, but they're just as easy as the rest of the tower. The roof isn't low enough to prevent jumping, and they don't even stick out all the way. They're all easily doable with a very easy movement around the blocks, and there isn't anything else bad for the rest of the tower. Kind of anticlimactic for the first hard tower, but a tower point nonetheless. In the interest of not wanting to play boring Garden of Eeshöl steeples, Tower of Heck is the last tower I'll be doing to unlock Ring 3. Despite the gameplay definitely ramping up a bit, there weren't any major roadblocks. I did somehow manage to fall through a one-stud gap and fail a few other times, but the only part of this tower that I would consider actually difficult is the last 2 floors, just like a regular playthrough. After that, I beat the tower and unlocked Ring 3. Now that we have Ring 3 unlocked, we have even more options for available towers. Starting with Tower Funny Thoughts, I mean it's fine I guess. This tower is honestly kind of overhated in my opinion. Like yeah, the gameplay is really boring, and there is that one section where you literally just walk for 2 minutes, but there's really not much you can do for easy difficulty gameplay, especially since it was made in 2018. Anyways, the only actual issue here was a one-stud gap that I could just slide through, and the rest was pretty much free. This tower instantly starts off with the weird spinning ladder jump, but besides that rude awakening, the rest of the tower is just regular medium difficulty gameplay. The creator of this tower definitely didn't have Shiftlock in mind when making this tower though, because they really like to add weird ladder jumps, which is pretty hard for something of this difficulty, but it was still doable without Shiftlock. And besides those jumps, like everything else, the rest of this tower is pretty much free. Oh. Yeah, so no matter what I tried, this one-stud gap is completely impossible to get through without Shiftlock. I knew tight gaps would be an issue all the way back when I was beating ToTS, but I didn't really expect it to actually make a tower impossible until at least Ring 4. The wall is too high to lag high jump over, and jumping from this ledge here seems like it could work, but it never ended up actually working. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to skip this one. This tower's gameplay is extremely boring. Because of this, none of the gameplay poses any challenge to us, since it's basically on the same level of complexity as Tower of Hell. Next. Like Tower of Deep Sighing, this tower is completely unnoteworthy. Absolutely nothing stands in our way of beating this tower without Shiftlock besides the regular gameplay itself. Another easy point. To unlock Ring 4, we need 3 more tower points, 2 hard towers, and 1 difficult tower. Tower of Big Hole is the easiest hard tower I had available, so I joined Ring 2 and oh, okay. Anyway, so this tower is known for having a lot of tight gaps and awkward gameplay, which is really bad for us. Luckily, besides a few small corridors, there weren't any major issues until floor 9, which has another 1-stud gap. There's a 3x3 stud stickout to skip it, but without Shiftlock, stickouts are pretty much impossible. Luckily, this wall is only 13 studs tall, which means I can introduce lag high jumps. To do this glitch, you have to hold jump while hugging the wall, and right as you hit the ground, left-click the white bar at the top of your screen that shows up when you have full screen turned off. This will give you a weird jump boost that can let you jump higher than normal. Using this, we are then able to skip the gap entirely, and we're immediately greeted by another one. This gap is much worse. The wall is way too tall to lag high jump up, and the wraparound is way too big to do. I tried lag high jumping up from this platform, but the cylinder is still too tall. I can literally see the wind pads sparkling, but there is no way I found to skip this gap. Sadly, this is another tower that is completely impossible for this challenge. We have quite a few options for what we can do for these 2 hard tower points. We could beat Tower of Killjoys, Overcoming Hatred, Fatness, or Winning Every Run. There's also a few steeples we could beat, like all 4 of these hard steeples in Garden of eeshöl or Steeple of Uninstalling Roblox in Forgotten Bridge. With the steeples, however, we'd have to beat a second one in order for it to count as a full tower point. I opted to do 2 regular hard towers because, let's be honest, the point system is kinda confusing when you throw fractions into the mix. I decided to go for Tower of Killjoys, which wasn't too bad. The gameplay was definitely the hardest of any tower we've done so far, but the only section that was made much harder is this 1 stud gap, but luckily it's next to a wall so I can slide through it. I also learned that push box sections are a lot more tedious without being able to move precisely, which really isn't all that surprising, but still obnoxious. Besides all of that, the rest of the tower wasn't too bad. Tower of Overcoming Hatred was my next best choice because I knew that the really lazy gameplay in the second half of the tower wouldn't be any problem. Unfortunately, I can't use the dance clip skip to skip half the tower since it requires Shiftlock, so I did have to go through the huge kill brick walking section, but besides that, the gameplay was very no Shiftlock friendly. Like I thought, the creator got so lazy with the second half of the tower that there wasn't anything remotely difficult past the tightrops on floor 6. I mean, seriously, what is this? Why? To unlock Ring 4 now, all we need to do is beat a difficult tower, and we have quite a few options to choose from. Steeples only give half a point, so I'd rather not do those. Tower Versatility is probably too hard, and Tower of Lots of Damage has that weird squeeze on floor 2 that I probably wouldn't be able to get through. Tower of Wall Hugging could be fine, but I could imagine some squeeze section or awkward stick out that could ruin the run. Tower of Cold Hands is technically the easiest if you go by the exact number, but the head hitters on floor 3 and 7 could definitely be annoying. This leaves us with 3 options. Since Tower of Sliding Convenience sucks, I decided to go with Tower of Keyboard Eating. It's probably the most common first difficult, and for good reason. It has pretty easy gameplay besides a few choke points. For example, one of the most infamous parts of the tower is this conveyor thing on floor 5. Many people can't even do this with Shiftlock, but you can also just hold W and A. Another common choke point is this weird high jump on floor 3, but as long as you line it up on the edge, it gets pretty consistent. On floor 10, we get to probably the hardest jump of the video. There are 2 ways to get up onto this platform. You can either line up a really tight head hitter, which relies on the rotation of your body when you start the jump, or do a really weird high jump wraparound, which is even worse. The rest of the tower is honestly trivial, and with that, we've unlocked Ring 4. The easier towers in this game are surprisingly easy to beat without Shiftlock. I could probably keep going on with Ring 4, but for the sake of my sanity, I've decided to split this into a series, especially since this video is already getting pretty long. I'm glad the easier towers are possible without Shiftlock though. If not, it would probably confuse a lot of new players when they see a supposedly impassable 1 stud gap in a wall. I think the game does a really good job at introducing Shiftlock mechanics early on with head hitters and even with the glitches in Toast. Granted, a lot of new players are probably introduced to JToH from games like Tower of Hell or difficulty chart obbies where they already learned how to use Shiftlock, but I'm glad it's there for people who randomly found this game in the recommended like I did. That's all for now. Good night, everyone.